Welcome to Sunday Morning with Trevor Phillips. It is, as the great football manager Sir Alex Ferguson used to call it, squeaky bum time for Rachel Reeves. To govern is to choose, they say, and on Wednesday the Chancellor will tell us how she is choosing to spend what is, after all, our money over the next 5 years or so. Sir Keir Starmer's hopes of extending his lease on number 10 rest to a great extent on his neighbour's ability to convince the nation that she knows what she's doing. We've already heard much of what she has in mind. More money for health, more money for education, more money for defence. Does that mean less to deliver net zero, less to stop the small boats, less to keep criminals under lock and key? It could. But it could also mean tax rises or a bit more borrowing. Except that she said she'd never do either of those things. But then again, ministers were never going to change their minds on the winter fuel allowance until they did. And the Prime Minister was going to get rid of the two-child benefit cap until last year he wasn't, though it's now thought that later this year the cap could be scrapped. Well, we've got 90 minutes and some of the best minds around to sort it out and help her decide. Let's get going. A little earlier, I spoke to the Science and Technology Secretary, Peter Kyle. There's news this morning that there are plans for a Chinese embassy close to the city, and some people think this could be a security risk. What is the government's view on this?
Well, this is in the planning process. These issues will be taken care of assiduously in the planning process. But just to reassure people, we deal with embassies and these sorts of infrastructure issues all the time. We are very experienced of it, and we are very aware of these sorts of issues constantly, not just when new buildings are being done, but all the time. So people need to rest assured that we have these issues.
There's a slightly tricky element to this because the people who are cheesed off about it, apparently, are the Americans, and this warning comes from the White House.
Yeah, but these are the issues that we talk about as two countries all the time. And, you know, they are right.
You want to talk to the Americans about where the Chinese can put their embassy in London?
Trevor, we're in the Five Eyes Agreement. America and Britain share intelligence iteratively. We are one of the few countries in the world that share intelligence, and we treat each other's intelligence.
Yeah, this is you're sharing planning regimes as well.
Well, what you're talking about is a security issue, and if people raise security issues, even though it relates to planning, then I'm sure we will have a fulsome response for them. But look, the key thing is, these are issues which are quite routinized in the way that we deal with the security of our country. This is not new. It's going through planning. These are issues that will be dealt with in that process.
OK, we'll keep an eye on it. Now, look, we could have a traditional bit of this interview where I ask you what's in the spending review and you give me a knowing smile and tell me you don't know, but you do know, but you won't tell me. So let's...
Trevor, you're so cynical. You've not been doing this for the longest of your colleagues here at Sky.
I respect you and I think I don't want to waste your time. So let's get rid of that bit and let's cut straight to the chase. Will Rachel Reeves explain who is now going to get the winter fuel allowance and who is not?
These issues are going to be dealt with in the run-up to the autumn, where these decisions are going to be taken and announced. But this is a spending review that's going to set the overall spending constraints for government for the next period, for the next 3 years. So you're sort of talking about two separate issues at the moment.
So we won't get an answer on winter fuel this week?
I think what you're going to see is the overall spending constraints and allowances for each government department, and then each department's then going to start talking about how it's going to allocate those spending. I'm
taking it as a no, so let's get on to the actual substance of it. First and most important thing, is she going to restate her commitment to stick to the fiscal rules she set out before the elections?
She has set out the fiscal rules. She is sticking to the fiscal rules, and they are the bedrock that's returned the stability to our economy.
And there's going to be no
for which we are now building. Now, you will see in this spending review that we are investing the most we have ever spent per pupil in our school system. We are investing the most we've ever done in R&D for our overall country.
Okay.
Now, what does this mean, Trevor? It means that we are investing in the future. Now, no company, no organisation has ever turned itself around from failure, and our country was failing without innovating and without investing into the future. And that's what we're doing, and that's what Rachel Reeves understands. So yes, we have raised tax in the autumn. We are now allocating that appropriately so that we can get into those high growth areas, and we can invest in the skills and the young people so that when they come into the new economy, they're able to take advantage of those great jobs that we will be creating through the innovation of today.
When you say that we're failing, do you mean we're still failing?
I said we were failing. When we came into office, we inherited an economy that was drowning, public services that were on their knees, and a country and a society that was deflated and didn't believe in itself. This is the inheritance that we had, and that's what we're starting to turn around. She fixed the foundations in the autumn budget, and now you're starting to see how we're investing into the future.
One of the ways she fixed the foundations was to take, as you said, 40 billion extra in tax. We're hearing that you're going to get, I see you smiling this morning, you're going to get over 80 billion quid to put into research. That's more than 40 billion. Where is that money coming from?
That's over the course of this spending review period.
OK, 3 years. You're going to get... that's 27, 28 billion just for you.
And we are building on the money that was allocated in the last budget. In the last budget, it wasn't really reported very much. We had an overall increase in our R&D budget by 8.5%. Rachel did raise money. She invested it into our public services, but also invested it into the parts of the economy that we're going to start turning around and getting growth into it. This is the difference between... This is the difference in approach, and it's fundamental, Trevor, between what the Tories did and what we are doing.
Well, I want to ask about whether it is that different, because the Tories used to come in here and tell me that they're going to put extra money into such and such, and then we discover it was the same money they told me about a month ago. Is this extra 80 billion completely new money, or is it the money we heard about in the autumn?
No, this will be the total spend on R&D as our nation, as we move forward as our nation.
So it's not extra money?
No, so hang on a sec. Rachel raised money in taxes in the autumn. We are now allocating it per department, but the key thing is we are going to be investing record amounts of money into the innovations of the future. Just bear in mind how Apple turned itself around. When Steve Jobs came back to Apple, they were 90 days from insolvency. That's the kind of situation that we had when we came into office. Now, Steve Jobs turned it around by inventing the iMac, moving to a series of products like the iPod. Now, we are starting to invest in the vaccine processes of the future, some of the high-tech solutions that are going to be high growth. We're investing in our space sector, all these really highly innovative sectors.
I understand the list.
For which they will create jobs in the future, and the wealth and the innovation, the new jobs and businesses into the future.
I understand the list. And, you know, Apple went and raised a load of money borrowed a load of money from Wall Street, which you are not doing, you say. But the specific point I want to come back to is you're getting a lot of money to put into research, as you say, record numbers. The boss of the Wellcome Foundation says this morning that the barriers, such as high visa costs for scientists and the university funding crisis, means that even that amount of money won't make the advances needed to secure the UK's reputation for science. And Wellcome is the biggest funder of science. How do you respond to that? It's not enough.
Well, I respond to it by talking the language of science, and that is evidence. We have had an increase in the number of people coming to our country on these highly skilled visas, the sort of kind of jobs and visas that I think he is talking about, not a decrease. We are a global destination for talent. We are increasingly a global destination for talent. And when you saw the immigration white paper released by the Home Secretary recently, there were very clear pathways for people to come to our country if they are investing in our country, if they have highly desirable skills, and if they will contribute to the kinds of innovations which are going to put Britain at the forefront going forward.
So we can expect to see more visas issued for scientists, for highly skilled people.
Yes.
There's going to be more immigration at that level.
There will be more highly skilled people and people coming to invest. The bar is higher than it has ever been, but we do need people to come here and invest, to come and teach our universities, to be part of the collaborations that are going to create new businesses that we'll upscale. Why is it that Britain has never had a £1 trillion, $1 trillion company?
Well, I've sat through many seminars and many reasons. I don't think we've got time to discuss that.
You need the people who are going to set these companies up. Now, many of them are going to be British people here already, but you do need to have global talent there to drive it. That's what we're trying to appeal for.
By the way, it means more immigration, doesn't it?
We're talking
including
about,
more immigration of students
we're talking
and postgrads.
We're talking about people coming here who are sometimes Nobel laureates, who have already set up billion-dollar companies. We're attracting these kinds of people to come and spend their money here, to spend their innovation here, to invest in Britain. That's what we need to see.
I'm only rushing you because we've got to talk a little bit about politics, and I want to talk to you about artificial intelligence. Labour scraped a win in the Hamilton by-election.
Trevor, don't underplay it.
Hundreds of votes rather than thousands. Your candidate tried to dismiss reform as a racist fan club for Nigel Farage. Does it disturb you that more than 1 in 4 voters opted to vote for someone that you regard as a racist?
Firstly, a win is a win. Secondly, the swing towards Labour was considerable. Thirdly, we actually won against the odds, and I don't think you'd have put money on Labour winning based on what you were hearing in advance of the election.
Nobody would have put money on reform coming from 0 to 26%.
And in terms of reform, we do not underestimate reform. We believe that reform is actually our opposition right now, because the Tories have imploded so comprehensively, they have filled the vacuum left by the Tory party. So we are not dismissing them.
They're now the official opposition?
We are treating them as if they are the opposition, because, in fact, they are the ones who are actually winning in parts of the country the Tories used to win, but they're now left the pitch altogether. So we are engaging with reform. We understand that they are, a powerful force in politics, but also we understand that they are a party that cannot shoulder the weight of power, because just look already that they're falling apart. We understand already that they are mimicking the policies of Liz Truss that blew up our economy. They are an irresponsible party, but we are taking them on as the official opposition right now.
Can I just ask you quickly a couple of questions about AI? Regulation of AI, it's a big issue between the House of Lords and the government. I've written some books. I've written millions of words. Is it your intention to allow big tech to use my work to train its machines without my permission and not paying me?
No, it is the opposite. Now, what we have at the moment is a standoff with the House of Lords because they're trying to attach one particular amendment on one particular part of copyright to a bill that doesn't have anything to do with copyright. I've proposed that we take this issue on head-on. I want to bring in a comprehensive set of measures that will look at copyright in the digital age, that will give the digital protections to great authors like yourself in the digital age that, unfortunately, simply will not stand if we leave copyright laws in the analogue age. I need to modernise it properly, not just do it piecemeal on the pieces of legislation that aren't fit for it.
One last point about AI, which is from my colleague Stan Coates, who discovered this week by accident that ChatGPT had published a transcript of a programme that he made. The thing is that the transcript was published before he'd recorded the programme, and it was based on previous broadcasts. Isn't that an incredibly dangerous thing?
It's a really worrying thing. It is, and that's why people need to understand that AI is not flawless and that AI does lie, because it's based on human characteristics. Now, it is getting more precise as we move forward, it's getting more powerful as we move forward, but as with every single technology that comes into society, you can only safely use it and wisely use it by understanding how it works. And that's why, people shouldn't think that AI is just like a search engine. Actually, it works very, very differently, and the results it comes up with need to be taken into consideration.
So there's going to be some new regulation at some point on that issue?
We are going to legislate for AI going forward, and we're going to balance it with the same legislation that we'll bring in to modernise the copyright legislation as well. But I've tasked every single one of our regulators to see how AI is going to impact the sectors that they regulate and to adjust accordingly. So we are taking a lot of measures on AI.
Last very quick thing. Last night, an anatomical word, which I can't use on Sunday morning, was chanted about the Prime Minister. It had 4 letters in it. Isn't it really early in your term of office for that level of unpopularity?
I'm not a football follower. I only watch when the Brighton and Hove Albion are playing, and I don't think the fans of Brighton would use such words against about Keir. It's football. It's football chanting. It's part of the. Is it not part of the spirit of the game?
Well, the England manager says he thinks it's pretty unacceptable, and even my team, which is pretty rough, I don't think we do that.
Right. Okay. Well,
the point is, isn't this a disturbing signal for the government?
Actually, we have a Prime Minister that has taken really tough decisions when he came in. People have to understand that when you win an election, things don't go back to zero. You start off where the other lot left off. And we've had to do some really difficult things because they didn't take the difficult decisions in office. It's forced us to take those difficult decisions in office. But now, when you see the results of the spending review and how we're prioritising children, children's future, and the future of the economy so that kids get into an economy which actually is thriving, and we're doing the trade deals, so when kids are creating their jobs of the future, they have export opportunities. You see the plan for change that we are landing, how it will deliver. People will start to see that next. So next time we have an England game, I'm sure they'll be chanting some really nice things about us too.
Peter Kyle, thank you very much for your time this morning.
Thanks.
Well, let's see what our panel made of all that. We're joined all morning by the former Cabinet Secretary, Simon Case, the editor-at-large of the Wall Street Journal, Gerard Baker, and the economist Linda Yu. Simon, let me start with you, because you're a veteran of these spending reviews. How important is this one going to be?
This is a big deal for this government. There's a great temptation, I think, to see these spending reviews as a bureaucratic exercise, handing out the money, working out who gets what. But what really matters about this one is that this one sets the spending priorities for the next 3 years, so the bulk of this Parliament. And although money isn't everything in government, if you don't have money, it's probably not going to happen. So what we should see from the Chancellor on Wednesday is the clearest indication we've had yet of what this government plans to do between now and the next general election.
So, in a sense, this is their platform for their next election campaign.
Yeah, I mean, yes, and also the translation of the manifesto plus tweaks based on, what you can actually achieve in government, the cold reality of governing. You see it, but yeah, absolutely right. This is, as I say, it's not the bureaucratic exercise. Really, what you should expect to hear the Chancellor say on behalf of the whole government on Wednesday is this is what we're about.
At the heart of this, of course, is Rachel Reeves's commitment to the fiscal rules. There are many people, I guess, including myself, are surprised by the extent to which she has really nailed herself to them. I mean, some people would say nailed herself to the cross on this. Do you think she's going to sustain that?
I do. I think she's very clear that this, as they call it, fiscal stability really matters. It was one of the two things that the government talked about in opposition during the election campaign, making sure that they dealt with perhaps some of the historical weaknesses as seen with the Labour Party. One was national security. Spoken a lot about this last week with the Strategic Defence Review, but also fiscal responsibility, fiscal stability, perhaps making a contrast with Liz Truss era, for example, I know is one of the things they're keen to do and have been doing in the last couple of weeks all over again.
Everybody's mind.
It's funny, Liz Truss has become a sort of plague Mary. Everybody's disowning her. But anyway, carry on.
So I think this really, this really matters. This will be a topic that I think Linda can talk even more about than I can, but Rachel Reeves did give herself some more wiggle room than previous chancellors have got. The fiscal rules that she set for herself on coming in allowed her to borrow a bit more money to spend on what we call capital, the big investment, the big infrastructure programme. So she has given herself that space.
So, Linda, do you agree with that, that she's got a little bit more room than might be apparent?
Yes, on investment. No, when it comes to day-to-day spending, just because she kept that fiscal rule. So there's actually two sets of fiscal rules. The fiscal stability rule, like Simon said, which is you're only going to, day-to-day spending has to be met with tax increases. But she also has a only borrow to invest rule. So what we're expecting on Wednesday is a 1.2% increase in real terms on day-to-day departmental spending, which is in cash terms. But on investment, I know this sounds minuscule, but it's important, 1.3% in real terms over 4 years. But I think the translation of that into growth is actually why I think so far markets are pretty happy the investment is going into areas that could actually generate growth. So as an example, Trevor, planning reform, the Office of Budget Responsibility says that will raise growth by 0.2%. Now, again, when you're dealing with small numbers of a 1% growth rate this year, 0.2% over the next few years is actually pretty substantive.
Jerry, you're slightly looking at it through an outsider's eye, but what credibility do you attach to what we're hearing?
So far, not much. Look, I think what's interesting is, and looking at it from an international perspective, if you like, this is a very fragile moment in financial markets right now. I'm based in the US and write a lot, obviously, about what Donald Trump is doing. And in the US right now, they're having a big debate about fiscal policy, about this budget that the president wants to pass. Financial markets are somewhat on edge about this. US bond yields have gone up quite significantly over the last few months. There's real concern that the US debt, which is already at $36 trillion, is going to rise even faster as a result of this. So the markets are on alert for any kind of signs of fiscal weakness, any kind of signs of instability. And I think, by the way, we talk about Liz Truss, and inevitably the name comes up again and again in these contexts, and will always come up when anybody talks about fiscal prudence or imprudence. But it's always important to remember that what happened in late 22, when we had the disastrous period then, did come at a similar time of real nervousness in financial markets. One of the reasons one of the mistakes I think Liz Truss made was to try to do what she did just at the point when the US interest rates were going up sharply. There were the concerns then about inflation. So I think this fiscal prudence, this sticking to the fiscal rules, with the experience of Liz Truss, with the knowledge that there's a certain amount of, quite a lot of volatility in financial markets. People are uncertain. Look what's happened to the dollar in the last 6 months. People are uncertain about what's going to happen with Donald Trump's tariffs. I think in those circumstances, playing it really safe is actually quite sensible at macroeconomic policy.
But she's going to get a lot of political pressure on to loosen them in some way, even if surreptitiously by rubbing out the line between capital spending. What departments do you think, Simon, are actually going to get punished now?
Punished?
Or rather, down arrows, I think is the expression.
Yeah, down arrows. Well, I think if you're not in what we would now call sort of a core growth department, you talked earlier to Peter Kyle, he looks like he's going to be a winner. We know,
he was smiling a lot today.
Cat who'd got the cream. We've heard about defence and health, I think, has already been foreshadowed that there'll be a very significant increase there. If I were anywhere else, I'd start to get a bit worried. It'd be very interesting to see what happens in education, in housing, policing and immigration. I think these will be the tricky ones, which everyone will be looking out for on Wednesday. And I think this starts to talk to the Chancellor's challenge, as the Chancellor has two audiences that she's trying to talk to on Wednesday. As Jerry put it, that there are the people who hold our debt. There's the markets who are looking for that sort of fiscal prudence, making sure that the Chancellor stays colouring in within the lines. But she's also got to prove to her own party colleagues in Parliament that this isn't austerity 2.0, as people have started to call it, and make very clear, as again you raised with Peter Kyle, that she and the government is listening to those concerns on the back benches.
One quick thing. If you're a permanent secretary in the Justice Department, you've got prisons bulging at the seams, you're not going to get any money. What are you thinking this morning, and what are you doing?
Well, certainly, I think probably over the last few weeks, the Permanent Secretary will have been making very, very Mandarin-like but quite loud noises about the requirements to fund prison places properly. We know it's been an absolute sort of nothing short of a disaster zone over actually many decades of underinvesting in prisons.
You want to try and organise a prison breakout somewhere, just to
the old classic Whitehall trick. Now's a good time for a crisis.
Before the fiscal statement.
Monday night, 500 prisoners. Oh my! I need the extra billion now.
Yeah.
It's probably too late, though. I mean, the thing we've got to remember is, although there's lots of briefing out about things going to the wire, you've got to remember there's good old-fashioned printing deadlines that come into all of this. So a lot of the big numbers have actually been done already. So it's too late if you're picking up the phone to the Chancellor now, probably.
Linda, how do you think, what are the markets going to be looking for?
I I think they're going to be looking for whether or not the investment will actually be scored to generate growth, because there's still quite a lot of borrowing to fund this investment, and the UK debt levels are very high. So picking up this point about financial markets, the UK actually has, if you look at spending categories, the third biggest category, roughly speaking, after welfare and health, is actually debt interest payments. Right. So we have about a quarter of our debt, which is inflation linked, which is twice as high as the next G7 country, which is Italy. So very small changes in the interest rate borrowing costs could actually derail what we just described as a, roughly speaking, 1.2% across the board increase. But that's completely skewed because health will be prioritized, defense will be prioritized, and even within the prioritized departments, they may not get the investment. So I think you talked to Peter Carl, I think for a reason, science and tech are going to do well. However, I think everybody's going to be looking at DEL and the departmental spending.
Jerry, the numbers here must seem a bit puny to you.
Well, as they say in America, you know, $1 trillion here and $1 trillion there, and pretty soon you're talking serious money. You know, when you've got people like Elon Musk, you know, whose personal net worth declined by something like $35 billion just in the last few days, you can get it. One thing I was sort of struck by, I must say, Trevor, you don't mind me saying, I was struck by Peter Carl talking about making the comparison with Steve Jobs, that Britain was going to be the Steve Jobs of the era. Yeah. You know, forgive me for saying this, but to paraphrase a famous American vice presidential debate, when somebody said, you know, if I may say so, you know, I knew Steve Jobs. I spent some time with Steve Jobs. Rachel, you're no Steve Jobs. And I think sort of trying to play that, you know, trying to make that analogy probably isn't going to work. I mean, and not just because, you know, Steve Jobs was a singular figure, but because governments just don't work like companies. So that's a pretty flawed analogy, I think.
All right, let's see how the Conservatives are dealing with this in a moment. They finished fourth in the Hamilton by-election, just 6% of the vote. And a little earlier, I spoke to the Shadow Home Secretary, Chris Philp. Chris Philp, the White House is warning that putting a Chinese embassy near the city would be a national security risk, according to a national newspaper this morning. What's your view?
Well, I agree with the United States. We think it is a security risk. In government, the Conservatives were very clear we should not be allowing the Chinese to build this super embassy. It is likely to become a base for their pan-European espionage activities. And it sits very close to, of course, the UK's financial centre. It's very close to 3 critical data centres, some cables data cables connecting, for example, Canary Wharf to the city, run very close or indeed even underneath the site. And it is very likely the Chinese would use it to organise espionage activities. We've seen the Chinese government cracking down on dissidents, running secret police stations in the UK, even putting bounties on the heads of dissidents, some of whom I've met. We should not be giving permission to this.
OK, thank you. This week, this is Spending Review Week. We've heard a lot about what you would and wouldn't do and what you think the government's failing on. Just one thing to be clear about. Would you restore the winter fuel allowance for everyone who had it before?
Well, we completely opposed what the government did, taking fuel allowances away from everybody. There are questions about whether the very richest pensioners need it, but that is not what the government did. The government took...
let's forget about what they did. I'm just asking you what you would do. And what you're saying is that actually you wouldn't restore it for everybody.
Well, just to be clear, we completely opposed what the government did a few months ago, which was take it away from pensioners, going right down to pensioners on half the minimum wage. They've pushed pensioners into poverty. They've put their lives at risk. It was morally indefensible what Labour did to pensioners this winter, and we don't yet know what they're going to do again.
Did you say lives at risk for 300 quid?
Well, there are pensioners who were unable to heat their home when it was really cold, and people do die of hypothermia, don't they?
OK, well, I just wonder whether sometimes the language on these things becomes a little bit extravagant on all sides. Just very quickly, your colleague Mel Stride's got a very unfortunate habit, he speaks English and people understand him, said that Liz Truss was responsible for much of the nation's current economic predicament. Do you agree?
Well, if that's a reference to the mini-budget, that obviously, at the time, had a bad impact. It wasn't properly constructed, and Mel Stride was saying that is not something that a Conservative government would ever do again.
Well, the reason I'm asking is that I think you were in the room when they agreed that mini-budget, didn't they? You were actually in the Treasury.
Well, if you read Tim Shipman's book about this and Anthony Selden's book, you will see that at the time I was arguing for spending restraint, or indeed spending.
I don't need to read the book. You were there.
Or indeed, what I'm telling you, this is what happened. The book is accurate. The book tells you that I was arguing for spending restraint.
Oh, so you opposed the mini-budget?
I opposed the way that it was constructed. I was arguing for spending restraint. Those warnings were sadly not listened to. Obviously, I was bound by collective responsibility, as you know. But if you read those two books...
You could have been unbound by resigning.
If you read those two books, you'll see what I was saying behind closed doors.
I don't need to read the books. I'm talking to the author of the event. Why didn't you resign?
Well, it's a good question. I took the view that making the case internally to control spending was the better thing to do, and I stayed and I tried to make that case internally behind closed doors, but it wasn't successful.
All right, look. This week, bad week for the Conservatives. You came fourth in the Hamilton by-election, almost lost your deposit. Voters are turning to Mr Farage. If you and Reform had been in any way united in that by-election, you would have won. Isn't it time for you to start thinking about a more constructive approach to Reform than what you're about to say, which is they want to destroy Tory parties, we'll never talk to them?
Well, there we are. You've just given me the answer.
I know.
Straight away.
I'm just asking you, isn't it time that you came up with another answer?
Well, I mean, Nigel Farage is saying he wants to destroy the Conservative Party, which makes it quite difficult to work together. They are all essentially a protest party. They're offering... you just asked about Liz Truss, right? I mean, they're offering populist policies that are essentially Liz Truss on steroids. I mean, Nigel Farage, in the last 3 or 4 weeks, has made tax cut pledges and let me finish, and welfare increase promises that add up to over £100 billion a year. Now, that is 2.5 times bigger than the Liz Truss policies.
We've heard lots from him.
Yeah.
The point is that effective democracy, liberal democracies need an effective opposition. And at the moment, with the greatest respect, it doesn't seem that you're doing very well on that. And I just wonder if, for example, this morning, your leader is... her big story this morning is promising to ban the burqa. Is this really the right priorities for the centre-right at the moment?
Yeah, that isn't quite what she said. But look, we are an effective opposition. We're the ones who are coming up with practical plans to reduce immigration. We came up, for example, with a whole deportation bill, with detailed plans to reduce immigration and remove people that have no right to be here. We did the serious work to do that. We put it to a vote in Parliament. Labour voted against it. Reform were absolutely nowhere. Just last week, we launched a serious commission on coming out of the ECHR, the European Convention on Human Rights, to enable us to take back control of our borders. We are doing the serious work on this. Reform, whether it's taxation or whether it's borders, Reform are shooting from the hip, saying the first thing that comes into Nigel Farage's head, they don't have a serious plan, but we do. Now, I know that people are unhappy with the Conservatives. It's going to take time to rebuild trust, but we're the ones doing the serious work to win back trust and to develop plans to fix our country's future.
When you get a bit further along the line on that, on the ECHR, let's have you back and talk about that.
I'll be here, I promise.
Thank you so much, Chris.
OK.
To Scotland now. The SNP said last Thursday's by-election was a two-horse race between them and Reform UK. Turns out no one saw the third horse coming past them. Labour squeaked home. But Nigel Farage's party took more than a quarter of the vote, with huge implications for ahead of next year's Holyrood elections. I can speak now to the SNP leader and Scottish First Minister, John Swinney. Good morning, Mr Swinney.
Good morning, Trevor.
Big event this week, of course, is the spending review. What do you want to hear from Rachel Reeves?
What I'd like to hear from Rachel Reeves is a message about investment in the economy and investment in our public services. There's a key project in Scotland that needs to get the go-ahead from the UK government, which is the Acorn Carbon Capture and Storage project, which will open up huge new opportunities for us to make progress on net zero and to strengthen the energy foundations of Scotland. And that's been long delayed, and it needs to go ahead on Wednesday. We need to see investment in our public services after so many years of austerity so that we can invest to support growth. And we need to see investment in some of the resolving the difficulties created by some of the early actions of the UK government, the restoration of winter fuel payments and compensation for the public sector from the increases in employer national insurance contributions that are significantly constraining public expenditure.
Well, there's one thing on which you're almost certainly going to get your way, which is they're going to put a lot of money into the defence industry. Can I ask if it still remains the position of the Scottish Government that, as one of your colleagues said this week, we do not provide or support the use of public funding for the manufacture of munitions?
That's the position of the Scottish Government. That's been a long-established position for the use of the public expenditure under our control. And what we do is we work with the defence industry in Scotland on supporting projects which will enhance their ability to recruit and to develop the skills, talent of individuals. That's where we provide our support to the defence industry in Scotland, and we've done that for a number of years. But on the question of munitions, we don't use public expenditure to support the production of munitions.
Well, I just wanted to be clear about this because you're quite right. You say on your website policy, defence industries welcome in Scotland, it's central to our engineering industry and so on, but you are unwilling to devote Scottish funds, for example, to the training of people in that defence industry.
We currently support the skills development within the industry. That's part and parcel of the support that we currently provide in a number of different areas. So that's part of the approach that we take in exercising our responsibilities to ensure that we've got a skilled and trained and effective population to support a range of industries in Scotland, one of which is the defence sector.
All right. This week, you had said that the Hamilton by-election would be a two-horse race, you versus Reform. Horse of a different colour won. Labour, what went wrong?
What I identified during the election campaign was that the Labour vote was collapsing, and it did. A year ago, the Labour vote was 50% in that area, and in the by-election it was down to just over 30%. And I identified that Reform were surging, and Reform came from, frankly, nowhere to command, as you just said a moment ago, 25% of the vote. So the dynamics of the election that I identified were what transpired, that the Labour vote came down substantially, the Reform vote came up significantly, and the SNP vote, while it improved, didn't improve enough to win. Now, obviously, I'm very disappointed that we didn't win the Hamilton, Larkhall and Stonehouse by-election on Thursday. We worked incredibly hard to make sure that could be the case. We made progress based on
happened?
what was...
People are falling out of love with Labour. Why aren't they going to you rather than Mr Farage, who basically... He's almost got no operation in Scotland whatsoever.
Well, what we've got to do is we've got to win people back by a compelling proposition of the SNP government delivering on the issues that people are concerned about. And I heard loud and clear from the voters in the by-election that they're concerned about the cost of living and the standards of living, and we're taking steps as a government to try to support those measures, whether that's through...
But you have been government for nearly 2 decades. Why aren't people turning to you when they have fallen out of affection with Labour? Why are they turning to Mr Farage?
Essentially, we've had a pretty tough time as a party over the last few years, and I came in a year ago to improve our position. We've made some progress based on the election last year, and we need to go further. And that's about addressing the real concerns of people in the community about the cost of living. It's about delivering on their expectations in relation to public services, particularly about reducing waiting times and waiting lists in our National Health Service and improving access to GP services. All of these priorities are underway as I speak just now, where we've got a relentless focus on doing all of that within government. And we've got to give people the hope of what the future lies for Scotland, and that's as a country that can use our enormous energy wealth for the benefit of our people who are paying extraordinarily high fuel prices at the moment.
OK, to be fair to the Labour Party, they were only down 2%. I should make that clear. But the polls are now telling us that no party is likely to win a majority at Holyrood next year. Now, you've been there before, and you are experienced in coalitions. Can I ask, if the only way for you to keep Reform out of government would be an SNP, Labour and Green coalition, are you ready to make that work?
I think we're getting a wee bit ahead of ourselves, Trevor. I understand the interest
Well,
and the intrigue about what the post-election arrangements might be, but what I will say to you
voters would
today,
probably like to know
absolutely
what you do in
definitively-
that situation.
Well, what I would do is I would pursue the policy priorities of my party and the government that I've got the privilege to lead. And I'll set out in advance of that election the measures that will bring people to supporting the SNP so that we can do as well as we possibly can do in the forthcoming parliamentary election. But we'll be going into that with the aim of winning that election. Now, if you look at the result on Thursday, all the pollsters say that if that was applied across the wider election in Scotland, the SNP would remain, by a country mile, the largest political party in the Scottish Parliament. Now, that's not good enough. I want to get us stronger in that election. But I'll tell you one thing I will not do, under any circumstances, is do any form of deal or any cooperation with Farage. I just won't do it, and people need to understand that now.
OK, so that's interesting. And not Farage, but open to the rest. Thank you very much, Mr Swinney. Thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you.
OK, now back to our panel, Simon Case, Gerard Baker and Linda Yu. Jerry, can we go back to the issue, the spending review and political issues, particularly with this issue, the surge of Mr Farage, in some ways not the same, but similar to what you're seeing in the United States. The spat between Musk and Trump, what's that about?
Well, so first of all, just very quickly on Farage and Scotland in particular, it seems to me, and I'm not following it as closely as you are, obviously, from over there, but it did seem to me that this performance in the Hamilton by-election, doing as well as they did, was a kind of a signal moment, really, because as I recall, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think any of Nigel Farage's previous political iterations did particularly well in Scotland.
No.
Referate UK,
They've never been
the
anywhere
UK
near
Independence
this.
Party, Brexit Party, obviously never did. So it seems like that speaks to a broad level of dissatisfaction with the political system. And that's where I would say the similarity, comes in with what Donald Trump has done. Trump came in 2016 as a complete outsider because people were really, really, really ticked off with the main political parties and a real hunger and a desire for change. On the specifics of Trump and Musk, look, there are many, many differences. Some of them are personal. Musk feels that hasn't got much out of his relationship with Trump, and let's be honest, he hasn't. Whenever you do a deal with Donald Trump, it's always a zero-sum game, and you almost never win. So,
Count the fingers.
there are, the number of people who thought they were going to get something out of Donald Trump and were disappointed, could form a line from here to New York. So that's part of it. There's an underlying political issue, though, here, Trevor, which is the Trump coalition, if you can call it that, the MAGA coalition, consists of, as all American political coalitions do, a number of disparate elements. Part of it is personality cult. People love Donald Trump. There's a high level of that. Part of it is all sort of traditional conservatives and sort of cultural conservatives who may not like some of the things that Donald Trump says and does, but who really see him as a vehicle for advancing their causes, understandably. And part of it, particularly in 2024, Trevor, was a business element that really wanted, that admired Donald Trump's record in his first term in office, saw him as very pro-business and as being very good for business, particularly in Silicon Valley, people in the tech sector, and they thought, yeah, he's going to be good for us. Musk, to some extent, what's behind Musk's falling out with Trump is there is real concern in the business community about the things that Donald Trump is doing. And if you listen, Musk hated the tariffs, right? He hates the tariffs. And he came out and said that. Most of the business community in America hates the tariffs. They're pretty pro-immigration. Now, not pro-illegal immigration, and Trump has done a very good job in stopping illegal immigration. But people like Musk, he's an immigrant himself.
The high-value visas that we were talking to Peter Kyle about.
Exactly. Trump himself is an immigrant. Half the leaders of the big Silicon Valley companies are either themselves immigrants or children of immigrants. They understand how important that has been to the US economy. And so this idea that some of the Trump himself and some of the people have are basically blocking immigration, Musk has definitely fallen out with him on some of those substantive policy issues.
That sounds like a picture that we can reflect here, Simon?
Yeah, I think there's two things that parallels that worth drawing. I mean, the first, as Joe said, is the dissatisfaction with sort of mainstream political parties. I think it's quite easy to represent Trump's Republican Party as something not particularly like the old Republican parties.
Yeah, he's reshaped the Republican Party.
It's reshaped it and taken control of it, so that dissatisfaction is there. The second is this very interesting question about big egos working with others. There's no doubt in my mind, love him or loathe him, Nigel Farage is a highly consequential British politician in this century. What's really interesting, Trump and Musk, very difficult to put these big figures together and make them work well. One of the things that seems to be the case with Nigel Farage, I don't know him, never had the chance to meet him, but he's a big figure. He's often been, he's been the very big fish, the big ego driving things, solo operator. Can he work with other people? Can he hold a coalition of egos? And he's describing himself already as the next Prime Minister. There's a lot of people who need to work with him if he's in that job.
Just out of interest, Simon, I've got to ask you, any big ego clashes you'd like to tell us about?
Fortunately, they'll go with me to my grave. Some of those.
Wow, that's quite serious. OK, we'll talk after the show. Linda, I think there's an underlying issue here, particularly on the right. Essentially, those who think, as Jerry's saying, immigration, high-value immigration, all of these are basically people who say basically globalization's happening, go with it, ride it, and that's the Musk position. And then there are people who say, no, let's resist this, and that seems to me the Trump position. Is that a picture that you can see emerging?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we often say that Trump is a symptom. He's actually not the cause. He's actually picking up the idea that globalization has failed for quite a lot of people and actually for quite a lot of countries. So in its present form, it probably isn't working. So you see that, for instance, in a lot of his voters. Remember, he won all 7 swing states in his second election, and a lot of them are in the Rust Belt. Now, they haven't all lost their jobs because of globalization. A lot of that is also technology and skill-wise technical change. Sorry for that mouthful. But because that's a mouthful, it's easier to point the finger to globalization, which did have an impact. So I think part of the divide between Musk and Trump is that they're both pro-business and they're both, I think initially, they're not ideological in the sense that they are practical, they want to make money, they're appealing to people because they get things done, or that's the perception. But actually what's lying behind it is a deeper division, the one that you just highlighted, which is actually they have very different worldviews. So Trump loves tariffs. Musk, he produces all over the world. And so I think there is a fundamental difference. They're aligned on some things, but they're not aligned on other things. But I think this debate about globalization is one that we see here as well. A lot of it gets captured in terms of immigration. So that's become the kind of catch-all to why, because globalization is too vague. Yeah. So becomes captured by something. And I think it's been captured by immigration, and probably imperfectly so, as you would imagine. It's not all about immigration.
I think this is a long historical line of cleavage on the right, if you like, between the business interest and, if you like, the kind of nationalist interest. It goes back. We just marked the 50th anniversary of the EU, the first EU referendum, right, in 1975. Back then, the Conservatives were strongly pro-EU. Margaret Thatcher, most famously, campaigned very strongly for the EU because they saw the EU, as business tends to see the world, as a great business opportunity. And indeed it was. And Margaret Thatcher was, of course, one of the authors of the Single European Market. And then that runs into that. So that idea of Conservatives that let free markets take rip, let business grow in those conditions, it's good for the economy, it's good for business, that clashes with people's sense of national identity, with the desire to protect their borders, with the protection of sovereignty. And that's a long, I mean, you can even go back further if you like, back into the 19th century. But that point of cleavage among Conservatives has been there, and we're seeing it playing out, once again, both here and in the United States.
I want to come back towards the end of the programme and talk about another element of this, which is technology and its place, because that's a big factor. But next, I'll be joined by a British doctor just back from working in Gaza.
show of military might and menace. Why should the West trust you?
Frankly, I don't care whether the West trusts us or not.
Sky News. Get the full story first.
Have a quick word for Sky News. Is the West right? Are you fueling Russia's war machine? American journalist Evan Gershkovich is on trial here, but was first on display.
I'm Ivor Bennett, Sky's Moscow correspondent.
Jubilation in the streets, while some emotional.
This is a political victory for Prime Minister Modi and his Hindu Nationalist Party.
I'm Neville Lazarus and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi. Companies like these are helping India in its trajectory to be a serious player in space exploration. Sky News, get the full story first.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
We arrive. A secret hospital hidden in the Myanmar jungle, treating the victims of this bloody war. This is Myanmar today. Its military rulers don't want the world to see, but we have.
I fight for my own future. I fight for my generation's future.
This is an actual crime.
They don't care for that.
Myanmar army is only a couple of kilometers away.
So this is a major humanitarian disaster.
The misery in Gaza grinds on relentlessly. A ceasefire seems as far away as ever, while Israel and its friends and enemies trade claim and counterclaim. Meanwhile, people continue to die in terrible numbers. Sky News has followed the story of British doctors working in the Gaza Strip, and there will soon be a new documentary on that topic. One of those doctors joins me now, Dr. Victoria Rose. Good morning, Dr. Rose. You've just come back. Can you describe the conditions that you were working under there?
The conditions now are the worst they've ever been, really, for lots of reasons. The first is that there's been a real escalation in the bombing campaign. So the last time I was in August, although there was bombing, it wasn't constant, and the threat to us was fairly marginal, I felt. But this time, the bombing would start at 4 a.m. and it wouldn't stop. The hospital I worked in took a hit while I was there. So there was a lot more military activity going on. Possibly the hardest thing this time is the state of the population, though. They were really, I would say, on their knees. I think that Palestinian resilience that everyone says the nation has is really waning now, and you can see it and hear it. Lots of my colleagues were telling me that they would rather die than carry on with this war.
This is the Palestinian colleagues?
Palestinian colleagues. And then obviously with the blockade that there have been to foods and healthcare items, it's very difficult to work. The population is malnourished, which has a huge implication on what I can do. They don't have the essential nutrients and vitamins they need for normal cell turnover. So their healing capacity is much lower than it should be. Malnutrition affects your immune system, so your ability to mount a response to infection goes right down. So infection rates were soaring. Plus the fact that because of the aid blockade, we basically at NASA only had 3 antibiotics left, 3 types of antibiotics.
This is the hospital that you're working at, yeah.
And none of those were adequate for the sorts of wounds I was seeing. So you were seeing a lot of avoidable deaths, a lot of small children dying from sepsis that would have been prevented if they'd been in the Western world. So yeah, overall it was a really, really difficult time to be working there.
We've seen some of the reporting that you yourself have done from there on Sky News, and it is harrowing. What are the typical injuries that you've personally been dealing with?
It's all bomb blast injuries, so it falls into 2 categories. The first is a burn from the heat of the explosion, and you're seeing quite big burns. So in small children, we were seeing 35% burns, which in the UK would have a 50-50 survival rate. And then adults, you're seeing a much higher percentage of burn. The other type of injury is a direct injury from the blast. In the August, we were seeing a lot of shrapnel-related injuries. So when the blast goes off, whatever's around you, bits of masonry, get sort of whipped up in the explosion and then weaponised, and they're ejected at very high volume, at very high speeds, and they would hit a civilian. If they penetrate the chest, abdomen or head, it's normally game over straight away. But if it hits you in a limb, it's likely to break a bone and lacerate skin or remove some skin. And those are normally survivable if you can get to hospital. This time, however, it seemed to be more direct hits, and we were seeing a lot more bits of the body blown off. So we had a 7-year-old on our operating table who'd been in a blast injury, and her knee was missing. So the bone of the knee from the actual kneecap itself to midway down the shin had gone. All the skin overlying it had gone. And I was looking at the back of the leg from the front, really, and it was all anatomically quite difficult to get your head round.
You spoke a moment ago about the effect of malnutrition. Is that because of the aid blockade?
Yes, definitely. I didn't see any fresh fruit and vegetables while I was there. We had to bring all our own food in. Before, we've often been fed by the hospital. They will feed the NGO teams. That didn't happen this time. They don't have enough food to feed the hospital staff. They're trying desperately to feed the patients, but in certain situations, they're not able to do that. So there is a real lack of food. All of my colleagues that I met in August and met again in May and June have lost weight, all sort of 5 to 10 kilos weight loss.
There are two explanations given for this. One is that there is food going into Gaza, but its distribution is interrupted by armed gangs, by terrorists and by Hamas itself. The other explanation is that the food is not getting in at all. Do you have any, you wouldn't necessarily have seen it, but do you have any idea which of those is true and to what extent?
I think the food is probably not getting in the right way. I haven't seen any evidence of the looting that has been cited. But obviously, if there is looting and there is a black market, the answer is not to withhold the food. The answer is to flood the market, and then you won't have that problem of looting. But I think what's happening now, the way in which the food is being militarised and distributed in very small areas so that the population have to make large journeys to present themselves, to be given food, is not effective. And when we look at the ways in which the United Nations ran the operation, which was aid at scale through multiple entry points delivered to the community, not just food, but also the essential services that UNRWA do, Save the Children, the World Food Organization, getting it to the people worked far more effectively than this operation does now.
Can I put this to you? The Israeli Defence Force claims that there are armed militants who use schools and hospitals as command centres, essentially as shields for their activities. And, you know, I've been not in Gaza, but in similar zones, and that is not an uncommon thing. Have you seen any evidence of that in Gaza?
I can only speak for the hospitals, but I've never treated or seen anyone in any of the hospitals that I've worked in military uniform or with a weapon. The only people I've ever seen in Gaza with military uniforms and weapons are the IDF.
Dr. Rose, thank you very much for your time this morning.
Thank you very much.
And you should keep an eye out for the documentary telling the stories of British doctors working in Gaza. That'll be across Sky News very soon. Very important work. Well, up next, we'll take a closer look at the spending review.
jubilation in the streets, while some emotional. This is a political victory for Prime Minister Modi and his Hindu Nationalist Party.
I'm Neville Lazarus, and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi. Companies like these are helping India in its trajectory to be a serious player in space exploration. Sky News, get the full story first.
Well, let's dig a bit deeper into the spending review now. The Chancellor's going to tell us on Wednesday how the government will spend money over the next 3 years. Our money, by the way. Things like health and defence are likely to do well and to be protected. But that means other areas of government spending could be in the firing line for a harsher settlement. So let's discuss this with the Director General of the British Chambers of Commerce, Siobhan Haviland, and the General Secretary of the Trades Union Congress, Paul Novak. Siobhan, let me start with you. What do you want to hear most from the Chancellor on Wednesday?
So the economy is forecast to grow at only 1% this year. That's not enough. Business confidence is low after the increase in taxes last October. So this is a real moment for the Chancellor to invest in the economy. 3 things, Trevor. We want to see investment in physical and digital infrastructure that drives local supply chains, that has a really positive effect on local economic growth. We want to see investment in skills. We need the people to deliver that, and that's about local skills improvement plans, investment in apprenticeships. And then third, trade. So export is the fastest and most efficient way to grow the economy. We want to see government help businesses export, make the most of those trade deals we see coming down the track. But remember, this isn't about spending. This is about investment. Investing in the economy and businesses will really pay back for the Chancellor.
On trade, where is your main target? Are we talking basically about removing frictions with the EU?
The EU is our biggest trading partner. Nearly 50% of goods and services go to the EU. Absolutely, we need to improve, get rid of the barriers, get rid of the issues with the EU. But of course, there's massive opportunities in other parts of the world.
OK, Paul, of course, in the old days, trade unions would have been in and out of number 11 Downing Street making their demands. But what do you... I know you're much more polite these days. What do you want to hear most from the Chancellor?
Yeah, it's not about demands. It's about trying to identify shared priorities. So Siobhan gave you 3 priorities. Let me give you 3 from the TUC. First of all, I think the Chancellor really needs to sustain that investment that she put in at the budget into our public services and infrastructure, and to make sure that that money is spent well. So in public services, alongside the investment, I'd like to see the government sitting down and really thinking about a long-term plan to solve the recruitment and retention crisis in our public services, to deliver the biggest wave of insourcing, which they promised to deliver. And also, while funding for the NHS will be really welcome, we've also got to think about a sustainable funding settlement for local government and other public services. Second thing is their flagship employment rights bill, making sure the resources are in place to deliver that effectively. So funding for ACAS, the new Fair Work Agency, but also funding for that fair pay agreement in social care, so we can drive up pay and skills in social care, reduce the 131,000 staff and vacancies we've got there. Third and final thing, Trevor, vitally important to growth, is a coherent industrial strategy. Now, we're expecting the industrial strategy to come a couple of weeks after, but really an industrial strategy that is focused on creating good quality jobs and protecting good quality jobs up and down the country. And crucially, it does something about our electricity prices, because in automotive, in steel, in chemicals, energy-intensive employers are paying around about 50% higher bills than they are across Europe, much higher bills than they are in the US. If we're going to be competitive, we need to drive down those electricity costs.
There's quite a lot of shared material there, training and all the rest of it. I noticed, Paul, that you said good jobs. You didn't say good green jobs, which was part of the Labour mantra.
Well, absolutely good jobs.
Because that's the centre of their industrial strategy, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think we've seen some really positive things from government, like the Clean Jobs bonus. But I would say, actually, if you look at offshore wind, it hasn't delivered the tens of thousands of good jobs that it could and should be delivering in the UK. And that's why I think, as part of the spending review and the industrial strategy, the government has to think hard about conditionality. How are we using this to boost UK supply chains, to support good quality jobs here in the UK? We saw £15.6 billion worth of investment in local transport projects announced this week. How are we going to make sure that UK suppliers and UK workers are benefiting from that investment?
It's interesting, though. Both of you are focused on infrastructure development and so on, and the transport announcement this week. There won't be a spade hitting the ground for 3 years. Isn't it a bit frustrating?
I wouldn't necessarily agree with that, Trevor. I think if you go to... I was recently at Sizewell seeing the work they're doing there. There's already spades in grounds. That needs to be signed off next phase of it. We're already seeing a difference there. I was up at Doncaster Sheffield Airport after the Chancellor announced that reopening. They're already beginning to build. This stuff can happen quickly. And if you go to places like Hinckley...
Yeah, but the ones she announced this week aren't going to happen quickly.
No, but Trevor, I mean, let's look at a very practical example over the last few weeks. I mean, the government rightly intervened to save those jobs at British Steel and Scunthorpe. And I think for the public, they can see here is a government taking an active approach, investing to save thousands of good quality jobs. I'd like to see, obviously, we don't want an industrial strategy driven by crisis. But I think it is absolutely right to build on examples like that, to build on the examples like BAE up in Barrow, where there are 15,000 people now working on the nuclear submarines project. People will want to see the link between the industrial strategy and the spending review and real jobs in their community. And you're right, they'll want to see it quickly. That's why I think it is really important the government delivers its employment rights bill and make work pay plan as quickly as possible.
People want to see these things happen. They want to see them quickly. They'll also want to know that their money is being used well. And there's the other side of the ledger here, isn't there? What should they be deprioritising? What should they not be spending? I mean, if we talked about all the goodies that are possible, where should the cuts come?
Well, I don't think it's about making the case for cuts, but I think there are ways, for example, of spending that money more effectively.
If you want to spend more money somewhere...
Yeah, well, I talked before, Trevor, about the government's commitment before the election to the biggest wave of insourcing. I think hundreds of millions of pounds are lost every year in our public services to those big outsourcing companies who quite often... We've got people delivering public services who are on the minimum wage, who get no access to decent pensions, no things like access to sick pay from day one. Bringing those services in-house will be better value for the taxpayer and certainly better for the people delivering those services.
Siobhan, they used to say the language of socialism is priority is the language of socialism. What's a priority? What should be down priority?
Priority, the government's #1 mission is economic growth. It's what Paul's members want. It's what our businesses are delivering. That's where she has to focus her money, and that's where the efficiencies are going to come. And that is going to be the future down payment for our future prosperity.
What a dreadful outbreak of unity. Thank you very much.
Boring consensus.
Thank you, Sean. In just a moment, we'll hear once again from our panel.
I'm Stephen Murphy, and I'm Sky's Ireland correspondent based here in Dublin.
All alcohol products, not just wine, will have labels warning of liver disease and the link to fatal cancers.
Is it crazy? It's an industry worth around €14 billion a year. That's why Italy sees this Irish plan as such a threat.
It's always instructive and occasionally entertaining to hear what Donald Trump has to say on the issue of Brexit.
She's got her own way of doing it, that's okay.
The job takes me to every corner of this island.
The rioting stemmed from a horrific daytime stabbing attack at a primary school in the city centre.
The scale of the rioting and the destruction it caused is pretty much unprecedented here in Dublin.
Jerry, any comments on the judge's decisions? Do you feel vindicated, Jerry? This is the end, the somewhat chaotic end, of a 52-day trial.
Micheál Martin could be set to head back to government with the Taoiseach Simon Harris.
Are you confident that you can now return as Taoiseach?
I'm cautiously optimistic and excited.
A mystery press conference hastily called. Leo Varadkar strode out and didn't disappoint.
I am resigning as President and Leader of Fine Gael effective today.
The people here sometimes feel they're somewhat neglected by the Irish government, to the extent that this place is sometimes known as the Forgotten County.
The waters of Ireland and Britain should be home to great white sharks, but none have ever been found.
If there are great white sharks in this area, there's no reason they wouldn't come here to feed. It's basically a buffet on a beach.
This could be not only a record-breaking storm, but potentially the most dangerous storm ever to hit Ireland.
Sky News. Get the full story first.
Our app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos and analysis.
Evidence of the crisis.
Podcasts, watching us live.
Live here from Washington.
Wherever you get your podcast.
All in one place. And all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
A show of military might and menace. Why should the West trust you?
Frankly, I don't care whether the West trusts us or not.
Sky News. Get the full story first. Have a quick word for Sky News. Is the West right, i.e. fueling Russia's war machine? American journalist Evan Gershkovich is on trial here, but was first on display. I'm Ivor Bennett, Sky's Moscow correspondent.
We arrive. A secret hospital hidden in the Myanmar jungle, treating the victims of this bloody war. This is Myanmar today. Its military rulers don't want the world to see, but we have.
I fight for my own future. I fight for my generation's future.
This is an actual crime. They don't care for that. Myanmar army is only a couple of kilometers away. So this is a major humanitarian disaster.
Well, back to our panel, Simon Case, Jerry Baker and Linda Yu. It's really interesting, Linda. As always with these things, everybody can tell you what they want to spend money on, and there's a wonderful moment. The representatives of business and trade unions agree that everything should they agree on everything, mainly what the money should be spent on, but not where that money should come from. Who do you think are going to be the big losers here? I'm betting on jails, I'm betting on migration. What else?
Yeah, I would probably say almost every department that's not protected. So we know what's going to happen with probably international aid. We know there's probably going to be, DWP is probably going to be under pressure as well. So I said earlier, it's a 1.2% real increase across government spending, but that depends on growth actually hitting its mark. So if growth were to slow down, then I would expect even deeper cuts. So the protected departments, I think, will be fine, but I think almost everything else is probably going to be subject to quite a bit of pressure. And even the ones that are doing well, so for instance, we know the NHS is going to get a big boost in terms of spending, they may not get capital investment. So I think there's going to be quite a lot of, I'm afraid, relative losers.
Well, let's look at, one source of pressure on the government is the party. Yeah. It's not the bond markets, where, who are really the big guns here, but they have to pay attention to their grassroots. And this is a poll by an organisation called Labour List of essentially Labour Party members and activists. And there's an interesting hierarchy here. Obviously, you'd expect health. Interestingly, local government funding, a lot they want protected and so on. Defence, completely contrary to where the government stands. Government wants more on defence. Labour people don't think that it should be protected. Actually, what do you think, Simon, here? Oh, before we go on to that, here are the ones where they think there should be cutbacks. Well, here we go. Defence should be cut back. Culture and sport and international aid. But, of course, nobody wants to cut back working age, or very few people want to cut back working age and child benefits. There's a gap between the party and the government. Does that ever matter very much?
It does. I mean, all cabinet members will spend a lot of time listening to party members, to the backbenchers. Backbenchers can have a very powerful way of making their unhappiness known if they want to, especially when it comes to bits of spending like benefits that have to go through Parliament. So actually, all of those welfare changes do require bits of legislation, and you can get revolts, from the backbenches sometimes. I think the really interesting thing about these numbers, though, is the areas where people are happy to cut back: culture and sport and international aid. It's
There's almost no money going into
tiny
them
amounts
anyway.
of money. It's very interesting areas where the Labour list polls suggested people wanted to spend more money was on health. Well, the really interesting thing about health, it's an enormous amount of money. But we don't want to get too technical about this, but there are two types of spending. There's the day-to-day spending, and then there's the investment spending on capital projects. Well, for the health department, they spend about £200 billion a year on the day-to-day running costs, and they spend about £14 billion a year on that capital and infrastructure. And going back to the conversation we were having earlier about the Chancellor's fiscal rules, she has next to no room to move on that day-to-day spending. So it's really difficult to find more money for health on that day-to-day spending. And you can put more in capital, but it's actually spending relatively small amounts of money.
The place where we haven't talked about... I want to come to talk about housing in a moment, because that's a very particular British problem. But the Americans have spent a lot of time thinking about the welfare spend. And that's where the big chunks of money... And everybody's been pretty silent on this, I think, in the last few days. What do you think, Jeremy?
Yeah, I don't understand the silence. It seems to me that is, again, it's a very hard message to have to... I understand politically why it's difficult, especially for a Labour government. But the fact is that welfare spending in this country has grown dramatically. The critical thing is the number of people in work, or the number of people on benefits versus the number of people in work, because that ratio has risen dramatically, and the ratio of the income that you get from benefits relative to work, relative to salaries and wages, that's risen too. Frankly, there's lots and lots of studies on this now which show that for many, many people in this country, and we're talking millions of people in this country, it doesn't really pay to work. The government is spending huge amounts on the various different forms of benefit. You're absolutely right, Trevor. They're looking at the same thing in the United States. Obviously, benefits in the United States are not as significant, not as generous as they are here in the UK. But even in the US, they have something called Medicaid, which is essentially a system which is medical coverage for people who are unemployed or very, very poor. Those claims, that spending has dramatically increased in the last 10, 15 years, and they're trying to rein that back in, both from a budgetary perspective, because that's one way to save significant amounts of money, and what we've already talked about is a hugely expanding spending bill, but also to generate higher growth by getting more people into work, by getting more people into the productive labour force. I'm afraid until you address those problems here in this country, where they're even worse than they are in the US, you're not really going to come to terms either with the UK's chronic productivity and economic growth problems, or indeed the budget problems that are getting worse.
There's some people who think that actually the choices that's being made here, in the old days, it used to be, do you give more money to the workers or do you give more money to the bosses and so on? Actually, there are other cleavages, town versus rural and so on. And one of the ones that people talk about a lot is age now. And it strikes me, the two things we haven't talked about very much, housing and welfare, are representative of that. We keep the triple lock pensions, old people benefit. We are not certain to be spending a lot of money on housing. Young people can't get... So what do you think, Linda? Is that where one of the big choices is?
Yes, I think it is. And I think it's always intergenerational, has a very long time horizon, which makes it quite hard, I think, for governments to plan around it. But that is one of the things. And I think if they could get planning and housing reform done, it would actually boost growth, because it would actually give people more of a base of income. Young people, they could get on the housing ladder. They could actually then boost consumption. So I do think there's quite a lot that could be done there. I would also say the other cleavage is what we're likely to see on Wednesday, which is allocation of funding outside of London and the South East. They're retooling the Green Book, which looks at value for money in a way to try and get investment. For instance, it's reported more spending in Wales, more spending in Northern Ireland, more spending in the north around AI investment or chip production or defense spending. So I think those kinds of regional differences could also boost growth. In many ways, that's kind of low-hanging fruit. If you could just get parts of the country up to the productivity level of London and the Southeast, you don't need to reinvent the wheel. You just need to invest, but importantly, in the skills, in the people, which comes back to Joe's point about people. We have very high rates of economic inactivity. There's no point in putting a lot of money into infrastructure if you don't have the people who are trained to be able to use AI and do things more efficiently.
Simon, quick role play here. I'm the Chancellor, you're you. And I'm saying, Simon, what is my biggest choice here? What am I going to be remembered for or not remembered for? What's a big choice I've got to make?
What I would say and what I actually feel personally is no matter whether you like it or not, the next few years is going to be dominated by defence and national security. That's because I have a very pessimistic view of the direction of travel across the world. I think that is going to be, they absolutely will not be the headlines on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, but by the time we get to the NATO summit in a few weeks and beyond, we will be talking all about national security and defence spending again.
Yeah, I'm sorry to say, I completely agree. That is clearly the big challenge. And I think to Sir Keir Starmer's credit, I think he gets that. We've seen that. And we'll see. There are a lot of questions I know about the Defence Review and how it's going to be paid for and how on earth they're actually going to get to 5% of GDP and all of that. But that is the existential challenge for this country in the next 10 years.
Right, so this week, look out, submarines or breakfast clubs. That's it for this week's show. I'll be back next Sunday. Thank you very much.